Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session of Meezan lecture series. We have been studying Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi's Meezan. We have studied various chapters, and for the last some weeks, we are on to the social Sharia, in which we have discussed various topics. Today, we will discuss the topic of norms of gender interaction, which are primarily mentioned in Surah Nur, which is the 24th Surah of the Quran. And just as a reminder, the topics that we have already covered are nikah, relations prohibited for marriage, bounds and conditions of nikah, rights and obligations of spouses, polygamy, and after that, we have studied the etiquette of sexual intimacy. We have studied ilah, we have studied zihar, and divorce. So what remain include directives relating to widows, norms of gender interaction, which we will study today, directives relating to parents, directives relating to orphans, and finally the subject of slavery. So we are going to take up the norms of gender interaction first, and then we'll go back to the directives relating to widows and complete this discussion, inshallah, in the next few weeks. So as far as these norms of gender interaction are concerned, they are primarily mentioned in Surah Nur, as I just said. I'm just going to read out the translation of these verses, and then we will explain them and try to discuss them in detail. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Believers, enter not the houses other than your own until you have introduced yourselves and wished peace to those in them. That is best for you, that you may be heedful. Then, if you find no one in the house, enter not until permission is given to you, and if you are asked to go back, return, for this is purer for you. And Allah has knowledge of all which you do. It is no sin for you to enter non-residential places in which there is benefit for you. And Allah has knowledge of what you reveal and what you conceal. O Prophet, tell believing men to restrain their eyes and guard their private parts if there are women present in these houses. This is pure for them. And indeed, Allah is well aware of what they do. And tell the believing women to restrain their eyes and to guard their private parts, and to display of their ornaments only those which are normally revealed, and to draw their coverings over their bosoms. And they should not reveal their embellishments to anyone except their husbands, or their fathers, or their husbands' fathers, or their sons, or their husbands' sons, or their brothers, or their brothers' sons, or their sisters' sons, or other women of acquaintance, or their slaves, or the subservient male servants who are not attracted to women, or children who have no awareness of the hidden aspects of women. And they should also not stamp their feet in order to draw attention to their hidden ornaments. Believers, turn to Allah in repentance that you may prosper. So you can see that these 5 or 4 verses, they comprehensively cover these norms of gender interaction. Of course, men and women, wherever they are present at one place, as far as their presence is concerned, if they are unrelated to one another, then there is a certain decorum which must be followed. However, before this visitation even takes place, the first directive which the Quran has given in this regard is that they should not suddenly barge into a house without introducing oneself in a proper way. So on such occasions, the visitor should first of all properly introduce himself by paying salutations to the residents of the house. And this will make the residents aware of the visitor, provide them with an opportunity to determine the purpose of his visit, and whether it is appropriate for them to let him in or not. And another thing which is mentioned clearly here is that if the visitor hears a reply to his salutations and is given permission, only then should he enter. But if there is no one present in the house to give him permission, or if someone is present and the visitor is told on his behalf that meeting him is not possible, he should retreat without any feelings of ill will. Such is the importance of that privacy which Islam bestows on people, that when someone is visiting them and there is no intimation of their prior visit, so if the people who are visited, they present this excuse that they are not in a position to meet anyone, then that person should retreat, withdraw, turn back without any feelings of ill will. So while explaining the directive, the Prophet has directed the visitor to seek permission 3 times. So basically, we have seen how the Prophet at times explains the directives of the Quran. And in this case, he has said that because the Quran has made it evidently very clear that one should seek permission before entering, so the right way for this would be to seek this permission 3 times. And if he hears no reply even after this third call, then the visitor should turn back. Also, the Prophet is reported to have said that the permission to enter must not be sought by standing right at the front door of the house and while peeping in, because the very reason for seeking permission is that the visitor should not catch a glimpse of the residence. So the first thing that we have to understand is this issue of salutation. The second thing which these verses clearly outline is that if the visited place is a non-residential place, a commercial place, for example, it's a hotel or a rest house or a shop or an office or some meeting place. And for this, the Quran has used the words buyutan ghayra maskuna, which means these are places which are not inhabited by individuals, but they are public places. And on such occasions, the Quran says that these are places in which you need not seek any permission, and you can enter because, of course, this is a public place. Another thing which is now said, and which is something which is directed both to men and women at the same time who are present, what they are said is that they must restrain their eyes. And the Quranic words are يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ, which means that they should not stare at the physical attributes of the opposite gender in any way, because this is something which will be against their inner purification. The second thing which is stated, again, it directs this directive towards both genders, is that they should يَحْفَظْنَ فُرُوجَهُمْ, which means يَحْفَظُوا فُرُوجَهُمْ, which means that they should actually guard their private parts, which in other words means that they must dress up in a way that their private parts are not exposed, and their dress should be it should reflect decency. And as far as this decency is concerned, it should not in any way be compromised. Now, just let me go back to the first of these directives, in which it is said that you have to restrain your gaze. The Prophet has also explained this by saying that at times what happens is that you are not able to restrain your gaze because it is an accidental gaze. So for that accidental first gaze, the Prophet has said that this will not be in any way, a person will not be held accountable for that. But this does not mean that all first gazes are allowed, as people at times have interpreted. It means that the first accidental gaze is something which the person is casts on some woman, or woman casts on a man in such way, then that is something through which or by which a person will not be held accountable in any way. So as far as the Quran is concerned, it is absolutely clear that human beings, men and women, whenever they are present in one place, the first thing that they should do is to restrain their gazes. And as I just explained, the second thing is that on such occasions, their body parts which need to be covered must be covered even more carefully. Obviously, the primary way to achieve this is to wear decent clothes, and men and women should wear such clothes which not only hide their embellishments but also their private parts and their sexual organs. And on such occasions, care should be taken that a person is not exposing these private parts in any way, and this is the very objective of guarding the sexual organs. The Quran wants that believing men and women, besides restraining their eyes, also observe this norm of decency. Now, one more directive is given specially for women, because for them embellishing themselves comes so naturally. So the Quran says that it is essential for women in particular not to display any of their embellishments except before their close relatives and attendants. And these embellishments about them, the Quran says, "La yubdina zinatahunna illa ma zahara minha," which means that exempted from this are embellishments which are worn on limbs which are generally never covered. And of course, jewelry and makeup worn on the hands, on the face, and the feet. So these are the three organs. If they are embellished in any way, the Quran says that they do not need to be covered. So, illa ma zahara minha refers to those organs which people do not generally cover. We do not generally cover our hands, we do not generally cover our feet or our face. You have to have some external stimulus or some external need for that. Otherwise, they are always left exposed. So, the Quran says that any ornaments or any embellishment of these three parts, that does not need to be covered. However, other adornments which are worn on other limbs except these three, they must in all cases be covered. For example, if you have embellished your head, then the head needs to be covered. And if the head is not embellished, for example, and it's just combed your hair and just given it a general appearance, then as per this directive, it is not mandatory to cover the hair, although it might still be recommended that women should cover their hair. So this is one thing which the Quran has specifically said regarding women, that except limbs which a person generally does not cover and instinctively leaves them bare, all other limbs, if they are in any way embellished, then they should be covered. So, barring these embellishments, women must hide the ones which are worn at all other places. And to achieve this purpose, the Quran says they should cover their chests and necklines with their shawls. So much so, in the presence of men, they should not walk by in a manner in which they strike their feet on the ground and draw their attention. So the Quran says that that they have to draw their shawls over their necklines and over their chests, which means وَلْيَضْرِبْنَ بِخُمُرِهِنَّ عَلَى جُيُوبِهِنَّ. And if they have worn any adornments on their necklines and on their chests, then they have to be covered. And even they should not walk in a way that they strike their feet on the ground. And we have to understand that relatives and people of acquaintance before which the above mentioned display of ornaments is not forbidden is also outlined in this verse. And if we just go through these people who regarding whom it is not essential that one should one can bear these ornaments if he wants to on other than these parts, then there is a whole list of people which are given. They include the husband, the father, the father-in-law, the sons of the husband, brothers, sons, sisters' sons, and this is continuing. But before we continue the list, let me also explain that as far as the word father is concerned, the word ab, which is used for the word father, it extends to all upper relatives of this lineage. For example, grandfathers would be included. Similarly, when the word son is mentioned here, it would include the grandson as well. So, as far as the Quran is concerned, by using the word father, the grandfather stands covered, and by using the son, the word son, the grandson also stands covered. Similarly, women of acquaintance and maids. And Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi, while pointing this out, has written that it is evident from these words that unknown women should be treated the same way as men, and a Muslim lady should be very careful in displaying her concealed embellishments before them. The reason is that at times a woman can have sexual leanings towards her own gender. Similarly, at times being influenced by the physical features and attributes of other women, they become a means of inclining men towards these women and vice versa too. So such women who are not known, regarding them also the Quran says that it is better that this display of finery other than the one which is permitted should not be done. So only women which are known and the maids which are acquainted before them, it is allowed that the ornaments worn on other limbs except for the ones which are generally left bare, they can also be displayed before them. And then we have slaves. Of course, this is an institution about which we will study in some of our future sessions. It was an institution which Islam inherited in its own times, and the Quran gradually did away with this institution. But as long as this institution remained in its place, it was essential that directives be given about it as well. So it was said that regarding them also, women are allowed to display their embellishments other than the ones which are found on those three limbs. And then it also says that people who live in a house as dependents and because of their subservience or owing to any other reason are incapable of feeling any attraction towards women, before them also they can display their finery, their embellishments, other than the ones or besides the one they are wearing on their faces and their hands and their feet. So these adornments or these embellishments which are worn on other places also, they can be displayed before such people, regarding which we know that they do not have any attraction left for women, or they are so subservient to women that there is absolutely no chance for them to feel this way. And finally, the Quran says that children who are as yet unaware of sexual matters, regarding them also, or about them also, the Quran says that embellishments which are other than the ones worn on these three areas, they can also be displayed. Now, there are some other things also which the Quran mentions as I would say as an addendum. It's like something which has added. The first thing it says that children and slaves who frequent a house, who come into a house, they don't need to ask permission every time that they enter the house. It's not that they need to do so because they are part of the house. However, there are 3 times in which they must seek permission. And these 3 times are before the Fajr prayer, as the Quran says, when the residents are generally in bed. The second is during the nap in the afternoon, when they may not be wearing proper clothes. And then the third instance is after the Isha prayer, when they might be going off to sleep. So before the Fajr prayer and after the Isha prayer and during the afternoon nap. These are the 3 occasions in which people, at times, they're not wearing their proper clothes. So on such occasions, slaves and children, they must enter their apartments while seeking permission in these three times of the day. Other than that, of course, they have no restriction. So for this, the Quran has actually given us this detail. It says, believers, let your slave men and women and those who are underage ask your permission on 3 occasions when they come to see you. And then the Quran actually enumerates them. It says, min qabli salatil fajr, which means before the Fajr prayer. And the second is, wahina tada'una sayabakum min az-zahira. The second prayer is when you have put off your garments in the heat of noon. And then the third is Mimbadi Salatil Isha, which means after the Isha prayer. It says, at other times, it shall be no offense for you or them, because you go around visiting one another. Thus, God explains to you His verses, and God is all-knowing and wise. And when your children reach the age of mental maturity, let them still ask your permission as their elders do. So the thing which is clarified is that children, as long as they are underage, they are given this permission. But once these children become mature, then they too have to seek permission at all times. And then it says that thus God explains to you His verses, and God is all-knowing and wise, which means that at times the directive which is given, it does not encompass all these explanations, but when there are questions in the mind and there are questions people might ask, so the Quran takes a step further and explains these situations as well. So the second thing which is mentioned is that the directive of covering the embellishments of the chest and neckline of women, it does not pertain to old women. So if they want, they can, if they've passed their marriageable age, they can just put off their shawl that they are wearing. And the Quran has used these words that it shall be no sin for aged women who have no hope of marriage to discard their cloaks on the condition that they do not display their embellishments. And if they exercise caution, it is better for them. And God hears all and knows all. So the second thing which is stipulated here is that women who are past their marriageable age, if they want, they can put off their garment, their cloak, their shawl. But the Quran says that for that, the reason should be that they are they don't have the intention of displaying their finery. But it still says that if they still cover themselves, it's just better for them. وَأَن يَسْتَعْفِفْنَا خَيْرٌ لَهُنَّ. So if they still cover themselves, it is better for them. Thirdly, it is also explained in these verses, there is absolutely no harm if people and their relatives who are disabled or impaired in any manner come and visit one another, and whether men and women among them eat together or separately in their own houses, or of the various relatives which are mentioned in these verses, it's absolutely fine. So the third thing which is actually explained here is that these directives are not meant to put any social restrictions in such a way that people just cannot come and visit one another. In fact, they can visit one another and even eat together. And in fact, the Quran says, "An ta'kulu jamiyan aw ashtata." If they want, they can come and sit together and eat. And if they want, they can sit separately as well. So it is absolutely no restriction, because the Quran does not want any such social restriction which makes it difficult for people to come and meet each other and visit each other. And it gives a whole list of people that, as far as these people are concerned, if they are in any way handicapped, it is perfectly fine for them to visit the houses of their fathers and their grandfathers and their mothers and their brothers and their uncles and aunts and maternal uncles and aunts. So it's like a whole list which the Quran has given. So these are all as far as the directives of the Quran are concerned. But let me also read out this part of the Quran, which is verse 61 of Surah Nur, which tells us that how this concession has been given. So it says, "There is no harm if the blind, the lame, and the sick eat at your table, nor if you eat at your own houses, your fathers or your grandfathers, your mothers, your brothers, and your sisters, your paternal uncles and your paternal aunts, your maternal uncles, your maternal aunts, or of those who are financially dependent on you or your friends. There is no harm if men and women eat together or apart. However, this much should be done, that when you enter a house, you say peace to you, a blessed and noble invocation fixed by the Almighty. Thus God explains to you His revelations so that you may grow in wisdom." So as far as the norms of gender interaction are concerned, this is all what the Quran says. And lo and behold, it is such a simple agenda which the Quran gives. Just to summarize, it says that when you enter the houses which are residential, you must seek permission. But when the houses are not residential, they are public places, then no permission is required. And the best way to seek permission is to pay their salutations, which means to say salam. And if the people who are living in the houses, they ask you to return because they are not in a position to welcome you, then without feeling any ill will towards them, people should withdraw. Of course, that would mean that they have not given any prior intimation to visit them. So if they are visiting unannounced and if they are told to go back, then they should go back, because this is the respect which the Quran gives to the privacy of people who are being visited. And then, of course, it says that as far as the directives are concerned, which are given as norms of gender interaction, then their purpose is just one, and that is to purify your inner self. Zalika azka lakum wa athhar. The Quran says these words, which mean that this is more pure for you, this is more seemly for you to do these things. And the things that are mentioned under this are two which relate to both men and women, and one which is related to women specifically. So what is related to men and women is, the first thing is that they must restrain their gazes. Their eyesight for one another, the way that they look at one another, should have that modesty in it. You should look at unrelated women as if you're looking towards your own sisters or your daughters. Similarly is the case with women. When they look at other men, they should look towards them as if they are looking towards their brothers or their sons or even their fathers. So this is something which will create that awareness in them. And the second thing which is mentioned here is that men and women, when they are sitting together in one place, then their dresses must be decent. In nowhere their sexual organs, their private parts should be displayed in any way or made prominent. And one thing which is told to women, I mean, they are specially advised that because adorning themselves, because embellishing themselves comes to them quite naturally, so they are allowed to embellish themselves. But it says that if you embellish yourselves, then other than what you wear, your outer garment, of course, that is included, your outer garment and your own face and your own hand and your own feet, whatever you wear on these three limbs is something that can be bared, that can be exposed. But if you are wearing any adornments on limbs which are besides these three, then they can only be, they should be covered except for the list that I just read out. And that is what the Quran says. And it also says that women must not stamp their feet while they are walking so that they might draw the attention of other people. And this is all as far as the Quran is concerned. There is no face veil in any way, and we'll just see in a while how the veil or the face covering, or the niqab to be precise, has arisen in the minds of certain scholars, because as far as these norms are concerned, these norms end here. Now, what has happened, or what did happen in the times of Prophet, was that there were these hypocrites who wanted to undermine the status of the Prophet and his wives. And of course, they had this agenda of defeating religion, or defeating the new religion in some way or the other. But when they saw that this religion was gaining force and by leaps and bounds it was growing, one thing that they worked out, one thing that they chalked, was that they would try to bring the personal lives of the Prophet's wives into disrepute. Because if they are able successfully to damage their personal lives, to somehow harm their name and reputation, this would actually belittle them in the eyes of the common masses, and they would have that distrust found in them against their own leaders and their own prophet as well. So, because these miscreants were trying to create this rift between their own, of course, their own ill ways and between the decent women of those times, so the Quran gave some special directives to Muslim women and to the wives of the Prophet, so that these activities of the hypocrites, they are subverted. But before that even happened, the Quran actually started off by saying that these miscreants, these people who are after bringing this disrepute to the house of the Prophet, in order to make them realize that the household of the Prophet, the wives of the Prophet, they are much more elevated and they are in no way interested in them. Instead of addressing these hypocrites, the wives of the Prophet are addressed and said that if you would like to have any second thoughts regarding your marriage with the Prophet, and if you would like to separate from him in any way, because now some extra directives would be given to them which would put them in a little tight spot, so that these hypocrites are taught a lesson. But the lesson is being taught to the hypocrites not by punishing them, but actually by restricting the household of the Prophet and believing women. And this was something which was started off by telling them that these hypocrites are ones who are after the reputation of the household of the Prophet, and they are people who would like to draw this pleasure out of teasing Muslim women. So with this, we find that the Quran has given certain important directives, and it is said that these men and women, these decent men and women from amongst the household of the Prophet, and of course from general masses as well, when these women would go out, the hypocrites would tease them, and they would try to approach them and put them in a situation in which they would need to defend themselves. And then when they would be told off, when they would be scolded, they would say, "Oh, well, we thought that we are talking to a slave lady." And this was the pretext that they were given, or they would give in order to save their own skin. But the Quran, in order to let them have this excuse, not let them have any excuse, it gave an extra directive to Muslim women, and especially and to the women of the household of the Prophet, that they should draw their towers in a way, they should wear their clothes in a way, their cloak in a way, that they should draw them over themselves, and in this way make themselves distinct from slave women. So in order to make themselves qualified as decent women, so that these hypocrites are not given a chance that they are mixing up slave women and decent women and common women, they are actually told to make themselves distinct by drawing their cloaks over them. And this is something which would be a mark of distinction, and if these hypocrites would approach them to tease them, then they could be easily told or even scolded that, well, you are not approaching, you're not doing this to slave women, you're doing this to decent women. So for this, the Quran gave a special directive, which we are now just going to study. As you can see, it's being displayed right before you. It says, "And those who harass believing men and believing women for what they never did should know that they shall bear the guilt of slander and a grievous sin. O Prophet, in order to themselves from their pranks, in order to save themselves from their pranks, enjoin your wives, your daughters, and the wives of true believers to draw over them a shawl when they go out. It will become possible from this that they be distinguished from other women and not be harassed. God is ever forgiving and merciful. If after these measures also these hypocrites and those who have the ailment of jealousy in their hearts and the scandal mongers of Medina do not desist, we shall rouse you against them, and their days in that city will be numbered. Cursed be they wherever found. They would be seized and put to exemplary death. So you see, this is a very special directive which is given here, that as far as the Quran is concerned, when these hypocrites started to harass Muslim men and women in a way that they would call them by various names, they would tease them. So and when they would be called to account, they would immediately give this excuse that, well, they are not disturbing or they are not teasing decent women. All that they are doing is they are teasing or talking to slave women. So in order to curb this prank of theirs, the Quran said that yudnina alayhinna min jalabibihinna, that these women should put a part of their cloak over themselves when they go out, and this would be something from which they would be recognized. The Quran says, "Zalika adna an yu'rafna." This would be closer for them to be recognized, and then fala yuzain, they would not be harassed in any way. So basically, this directive of putting on a cloak on themselves when they go out is meant to curb these miscreants from teasing the household of the Prophet and Muslim women. It's not anything which is related to any directive of interaction or norm of gender interaction, because here there is no interaction of the sort that we were just discussing earlier on, in which people were meeting each other socially. This is a very special situation in which hypocrites were trying to bring the house of the Prophet into disrepute. And for this, the Quran says, it actually uses the words that people who harass these women. So the words are وَالَّذِينَ يُؤْذُونَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ. So people who harass believers, whether they are men or women. And then when the directive ends, you can clearly see it says that these people, لَإِلَّمْ يَنْتَهِ الْمُنَافِقُونَ. You see, now the word has now become absolutely evident that these are these hypocrites. لَإِلَّمْ يَنْتَهِ الْمُنَافِقُونَ وَالَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٌ. I mean, of course, people who are hypocrites and who have the ailment of jealousy in their hearts and who are scandal mongers. The Quran says that if they do not desist, then we shall rouse you against them, and then they will have little time as far as they are concerned. So the Quran has made it absolutely clear from the contents of Surah Azab that when the hypocrites and miscreants mentioned above embarked upon a campaign to scandalize the private lives of the Prophet, to make the common man averse to them and to damage the moral repute of both Islam and the Muslims, the Almighty took certain measures to curb this. First of all, He gave the noble wives the choice to leave the Prophet and live the life of common Muslim women, enjoying its luxuries and comforts, or to once again decide with full awareness to live forever as the wives of the Prophet, in order to obtain the comforts and luxuries of the hereafter. They were then informed that if they decided to stay with the Prophet, then they must realize that their status as his wives entailed great responsibility. As I just said, basically this was a directive given to them not to in any way regard them in botheration or to put them into bother, but to actually give those hypocrites some chance that if there is any chance left, an opportunity left for them to mend their ways, then instead of exposing them, they are given this chance, and instead of restricting them, restrictions are imposed on the household of the Prophet, so that if they tolerate this restriction, then the hypocrites would still have a chance, or some of them who are in a better position, who have still a soul left in them, they might mend their ways. So you can see how far the Quran goes, how far the Almighty goes in giving people the chance that instead of in any way exposing them, they were given this chance, and restriction on them was not imposed. Instead, the restrictions were imposed on the household of the Prophet. And they were told, that these women were told that Lastunna kahadi minan nisa, you are not like ordinary women. You have an extra status on them, you have more responsibility on them, and therefore you have to be even more careful. So the Quran has said this, that firstly, Ya nisa an-nabi lastunna kahadi minan nisa, in ittaqitunna fala takhda'na bil qawl fayatma'a allazi fi qalbihi maradun wa qulna qawlan ma'rufa. So in order to curb this tendency of these hypocrites to bring moral disrepute or scandalize the lives of the wives of the Prophet, the first thing that is said to them is that, wives of the Prophet, you are not like other women, so if you fear God, do not be complacent in your speech, lest the lecherous hearted should lust after you. Talk with such people in plain and simple words. So the first thing which is they must do, these wives of the Prophet, that they must not speak affectionately with these strangers, especially these hypocrites, because in that case they would take advantage of them. And this is what the Quran does not want. It says normally, yes, you have to be very affectionate and very complacent in your speech, but not with these people. And by not understanding this particular directive, some of our scholars have derived this directive that even the voice of a woman is something that one should not hear, without thinking that basically this directive is specifically meant for hypocrites who were trying to scandalize the lives of the wives of the Prophet. So about them it is said that wives of the Prophet, you must not be in any way use those words or be complacent in your speech or be affectionate or be extra gracious in your speech, because they would draw a wrong message for them. So this is a very specific situation. It's not a situation in which anybody can say that, well, the voice of a woman is something also which has to be concealed, as has been the case of this injunction being drawn by some quarters. Now, the second important thing which has been said in these verses of Surah Ahzab, so that in order to curb this nonsensical or I would say the nuisance value of these hypocrites, the second thing which is said to the wives of the Prophet is وَقَرْنَ فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ وَلَا تَبَرَّجْنَ تَبَرَّجْنَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةَ الْأُولَى, which means that abide still in your homes and do not display your finery as women used to do in the days of hikmah, in the days of Jahiliyyah. And then it says, attend to your prayers, pay zakat, and obey God and His Messenger. Women of this house, the Almighty wants to cleanse you from the filth these hypocrites want to besmear you with and to fully purify you. So in order to protect themselves from the filth that these hypocrites might heap on them, these wives of the Prophet are said that do not go out from your houses. And these hypocrites are lying in ambush for you. As soon as you would go out, they would try and tease you, and they would try to harass you in any way. So it is better that you do not go out. So again, you can see it has a very, very specific directive. But by not realizing this specific nature and this specific context, many people think that these verses actually have a general import, which means that women should stay put in their homes. They must stand there, sit there, and regard the house to be the center of their activities. This is an erroneous conclusion which has been drawn from this verse, because you can see it specifically addresses the wives of the Prophet. And as I said, the background is to give more time to the hypocrites to think, to rethink, and to revisit their attitude. So instead of putting restrictions on them, as I said earlier, restrictions are put on the wives of the Prophet, so that the people who are left amongst the hypocrites and they have a chance still to mend their ways, they are given that chance. So this is basically a gracious measure taken by the Quran. And instead of understanding it in its right context, a lot of people have understood this to mean that the Quran is telling all women to stay put in their homes, and they should stay in their homes, and their home is the center of their activity, which is of course something which is totally not what the purport of the Quran here is. Then thirdly, the Quran is given a responsibility to the wives of the Prophet. So the first thing is that they should not be complacent in their speech. The second thing is that they should stay put in their homes. And the third thing is that whilst being in their homes, what should they do? They should communicate the verses of the Quran as well as the beliefs and moral teachings of Islam to people who visit them. And for this, the Quran uses the words, وَاذْكُرْنَ مَا يُتْلَى فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ مِنْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ وَالْحِكْمَةِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ لَطِيفًا خَبِيرًا. And communicate to your visitors what is taught to you of the verses of God and the wisdom revealed by you. The Almighty is very discerning and all-knowing. So the third responsibility that is given to them is that when they are staying put in their homes, because they would not like to give the chance or that chance to those hypocrites to in any way molest them or any way harass them, then they should not just still sit idle in their homes. They should communicate the verses of the Quran, ayatullahi wal hikmah, so that people who visit them, they are able to educate them, they are able to inform them about the tenets of Islam. So these are the directives which are given. Now it seems that in spite of giving these directives, the hypocrites still did not desist from their ill ways. And they still would find ways and means to harass the household of the Prophet. So can you believe it? Some more directives were given to the wives of the Prophet, and they are also mentioned in these verses of Surah Ahzab. So it says that as far as the wives of the Prophet are concerned, if for them, of course, there is a special directive, but the first thing which is said to them is that Muslims must not wait in the house of the Prophet for the food to be preserved, because in this case, this would be giving the Prophet too much, time, and allowing him or disallowing him that privacy that he needs. So what would people do? They would go there and they would sit there, they would wait for the food being cooked, and then they would sit even after eating that food. So about them, the first thing that the Quran has told them is that if people are invited for food, they must come right at the time of when the food is being served. They should not sit or come before the food is being served and sit after that, because what they would do is they would barge into the house of the Prophet in this way, and then they would have the chance to once again harass the women who would be there. The second thing which is mentioned in the Quran is that the Prophet or the wives of the Prophet should be secluded from the Muslims, and except for their near relatives and women of their acquaintance, no one shall come in front of them. And they would just expose themselves to their immediate relatives. And the third thing which is mentioned again as a restriction is that these wives of the Prophet, they are regarded as the mothers of the believers, which means that now after the death of the Prophet, if the Prophet passes away, no one will have any right to marry them. They are mothers, of course, which gives them that sanctity that if you want to harass them, then you think that they are basically not some ordinary women, they are like your mothers. So this status was accorded to them. So you can see that these three additional directives were given. Initially, the directive was given was that they should not be complacent in their speech, they should stick to their homes, and they should communicate the verses of the Quran. But then three more directives were given. One of them was that people who come and eat food at the house of the Prophet should come right at the time of the food being served, and they should not barge into the house of the Prophet, and they should disperse immediately after that. So these directives are now given in a composite way in the Quran. I'm just going to read out the relevant part. It says, "Believers, do not enter the houses of the Prophet except if you are permitted sometime to enter for a meal. In this case also, do not sit waiting for the food to be cooked. But if you are invited, enter, and when you have eaten, disperse. Do not engage in familiar talk, for this would distress the Prophet, and he would feel shy to bid you go. But of the truth, God does not feel shy. And if you ask his wives for anything, speak to them from behind a curtain." So this is the only time in the Quran where the word hijab is used. And it is not used for any covering. It is basically used for the curtains which would hang on the doors of those houses in those times. They would be covered with curtains, and they would be asked that if you have to ask something from the house of the Prophet, because this was a common thing in that rural society, that people would ask one another for things, household things. So they are told that they should not barge into the house of the Prophet, and they must preserve and protect his privacy. And if you need to ask anything, فَاسْأَلُوهُنَّ مِنْ وَرَائِ الْحِجَابِ, they should ask the wives of the Prophet from behind that curtain and not barge into the house of the Prophet. And then it is said, and if you ask his wives for anything, speak to them from behind a curtain. This is more pure for your hearts and their hearts. And you must not harass God's messenger, nor shall you ever wed his wives after him. This would be a grave offense in the sight of God. Whether you reveal or conceal them, God has knowledge of all things. It shall be no offense for these women, of course referring to the Prophet's wives, to come before their fathers, their sons, their brothers' sons, their sisters' sons, their women of acquaintance, or their slaves. O women of the household of the Prophet, have fear of God. Surely God observes all things. So you can see that these verses of Surah Ahzab 53 to 55, they spell out three more directives, once again restricting the wives of the Prophet, so that more chance is given to the hypocrites that either they tighten the noose around them, or if they have any sense left in them, they should mend their ways. So more restrictions are imposed, and the first one being that once again they must confine themselves to their immediate relatives and must not meet other people, so that once again these hypocrites are not given any chance. Two other directives are also given. One of them is that these common people should not barge into the house of the Prophet and in any way compromise the privacy, and also not come to his house when the time of the food has not yet come. They should come right at the time if they're invited for food, and then disperse immediately after that. And finally, the directive is given that these women of the household of the Prophet, these wives of the Prophet, they occupy the status of the mothers of the believers. So you see, this is a summary of some of the directives which are given in order to curb the subversive activities of the hypocrites. So as far as Surah Ahzab directives are concerned, neither do they speak of the face veil as is generally understood. The face veil has come into consideration not as anything to cover themselves because of any norm of gender interaction. It is something which was used as a mark of distinction. And of course, it was not a veil also, it was something of a garment, an outer garment. And that outer garment should be something that they were called to wear or to hang on themselves, or to let it hang on outside themselves, so that in a way they are made distinct from these believing women. And remember, the words which are used are ذَلِكَ أَدْنَى أَنْ يُعْرَفْنَ فَلَا يُؤْذَيْنَ. This is better that they are recognized as decent women and they are not in any way harassed. So that is something which they would do. And in the times of the Prophet, it was very common. It might be very strange for you to hear this, but it was very common that in order to relieve themselves, women and men had to go out into the jungle, out into the forest, out into those unattended places where they would be able to relieve themselves. So these were times which typically the hypocrites would be relishing, because they knew that women have to go out to relieve themselves, so they would wait for that time specially. And it was mostly on such occasions that they would try to tease them. So, and when they would be called to account that you are teasing these women, they would just give this excuse that, well, we thought that we are teasing slave women and we are not teasing these decent women. So in order to make slave women distinct from these decent women were called to wear that cloak, which is an outside garment, so that they could be recognized as slave women. And now these hypocrites, they will not get the chance to put up this excuse. So this was a whole scenario in which, as I said, the hypocrites, when they saw that it was very difficult to defeat the message of religion in any other way, through wars, through other means, they thought that by bringing the household of the Prophet into disrepute, and in this way losing the confidence of the common man, would bring something of a downfall for the Prophet. But the Almighty, of course, planned for the Prophet himself. He told him that this is what's going to happen, or this is what is happening. But instead of punishing these hypocrites or tightening the news around them, the Almighty still wants to give them some more chance. He does not want to expose them at this time, because they are still people who might mend their ways. So instead of tightening them, that whole operation was, or I would say that whole restriction process was done with the household of the Prophet, and restrictions were imposed on them that they should stick to their houses, they should not be complicit in their speech, they should just come before their immediate relatives, etc., etc. So that these hypocrites are still given some more chance. And the words of the Quran are so clear that this was a measure that was given as a means to subvert these activities, that the Quran says that if these hypocrites do not desist from this, then the Prophet is being told that we will rouse you against him, and then they will have no place to go. And the Quran says, وَقُتِّلُوا تَقْتِيلًا, they shall be mercilessly put to the sword if they still persist in them. So you can clearly see that as far as the norms of gender interaction are concerned, they are found in Surah Nur, and they are very simple. But all other instances of Surah Ahzab which speak of these details which I have just divulged before you, they relate to a very specific scenario that had resulted in the Prophet's household being brought into disrepute. So we finish our lecture here. This topic finishes here as well. Inshallah, we'll take up some of the remaining topics in our coming sessions. And if you have any questions regarding what we have covered today, it is time to raise them.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. So this isn't quite related to the topic, but it's related to Meezan. And so I'd like to ask this question. It's in the chat. The person asks, in the preamble of the book Meezan, it is mentioned that hadith cannot add anything to the beliefs and practices of religion. So the question
Mhm.
is, if hadith literature is a historical record only, then why are hadith narrations being used in Al-Mawrid publications like Ishraq, Renaissance, or character development when it can't add anything to religion besides Quran and Sunnah? Using hadith sounds counterproductive if it can't
Mhm.
add to the beliefs and practices of religion.
Well, I'm just going to answer this question, but don't we have any questions which are related to the topic? If we can.
Not yet.
Okay. So, as far as this question is concerned, we have to understand that by not adding anything to the content of religion is one thing, and by explaining the content of religion in a way which inspires people, in a way which motivates people, in a way in which the Prophet himself went about following the dictates of Islam, is something which provides inspiration. So, I mean, don't we need that inspiration? So, the reason that we need that inspiration actually makes it essential that we use the knowledge of the Prophet. When he did something, he was adding nothing to the content, but what he was doing is he was trying to follow religion in a very optimum way, in a very inspirational way, so that he could give this guideline that this is how we should follow the dictates of the Quran. So he was setting an example, and the Quran has said, "Laqad kana lakum fi Rasulillahi uswatun hasana." So basically, this hadith is a record of how he went about following religion, and how at times when questions would be asked from him regarding religion, he would answer them. So I think this is the knowledge that the Prophet imparted to some Sahaba, and they thought that because these are pearls of wisdom that they are gathering, why should they not distribute these pearls of wisdom to later generations? So that is why we still need that knowledge. The Prophet was the first scholar of Islam also. He was a prophet of God, and he was also the first scholar of Islam. And a scholar, of course, when he does something, he explains some certain aspects of religion, he follows religion. You can look upon him and see how best religion can be implemented. So all these things and all these factors and all these details are found in hadith literature, and that is why it is all the more reason that this literature should be benefited from. Of course, the spurious part of this literature must be separated, and this has been done not just by Al-Mawrid scholars, but centuries before them, and still continuing in that tradition. There have been scholars of hadith who have tried to sift out the authentic narratives from the inauthentic ones, and they have created their own anthologies. And this is something which we have inherited from our scholars. And why shouldn't we read them, and why should we not benefit from them? Because, as I said, they give us that inspiration and that knowledge of the Prophet himself.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Ifan Ali, you're up next. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad and Maryam.
Wa alaikum salam.
Dr. Shehzad, whenever I read this, even in the past, one thing came to me, and I just wanted to confirm if my thought process is, right or not. So usually we do hijab, right, to cover ourselves. In fact, to hide the identity to a certain extent, because we have those burqas in, like how the Afghani women wear that you can't see anything, you can't tell who's in there.
Mhm.
But over here, the prophet's wives are directed to identify. It's like inverse, right? Allah wants them to be identified as noble women or prophets, household women.
Mhm.
So it defeats the purpose that you cover yourself today to hide your identity versus it was being done to clarify your identity. So then nobody can claim that we
Mhm.
thought it was,
Mhm.
that those slave girls or something. I'm assuming
Okay.
slaves girl will be wearing
Mhm.
less of clothing or whatever, right?
Right. Correct. Yeah.
So is that the right way to think about these
Right.
things? I just wanted
Absolutely.
to clarify.
Yes, that is the right approach. Because you see, the purpose was not to cover themselves in any way, because covering directives or directives which relate your own clothing and your own modesty, they are already covered in Surah Nur. It tells you that yahfazna
Right,
furujahunna, you have to wear decent clothes. This is a specific scenario. If you study Surah Azab, this is a very, very important surah of the Quran, and it shows that the penetration of the Islamic message was at its peak. And these hypocrites and the Jews, especially, and the people of the book, they were not finding any leeway to stop this tide. And one thing that they thought of was that, well, if we cannot do it overtly, let's do it covertly. And the covert measure or plan that they plotted was that they would bring the household of the Prophet into disrepute. Because if they are successful in conveying to the masses that, well, look at the house of the Prophet, these women are of loose character, or they do such things, then this would actually harbor that ill will in the minds of the common masses against the Prophet and his wives. And this would, of course, have a very negative impact. So this was the plot that was hatched. And for this, they would harass not only the Prophet's wives, but also women also of the believers. And it was in order to curb this that this whole surah was revealed and various measures were given. Now you see, as I just explained to you, that this directive that you must stay put in your houses, these women of the house of the Prophet are told, karna fi buyutikunna. Now, if you don't understand the context that this is a directive which is given to these wives of the Prophet, so that they don't give a chance to those miscreants to harass them, you will have a very specific view of this surah. But if this is not understood, as has been the case regarding many scholars, it would be generalized, and as has been the case, that we would think that, well, house is the center of activity of a woman, because the Quran is not just telling ordinary women, it's telling the wives of the Prophet to stay put. But they have not understood that the reason for this of abiding still in their houses is not because they need to stay there for any of those gender issues, but because, of course, the background is something else. So if you subtract the background, you will find a whole new interpretation of these Surah Ahzab verses, as if they are being told that women must stay put in their houses, they must not speak to strangers, even their voice has parda, even their voice is something that should not be heard, and that they should come only before their immediate relatives. So you see, the whole scenario changes if you change the context and the whole emphasis of these verses.
Agree. Just as a follow-up, if I may, if I have time. See, it also says, "Ma yutla fi buyutikunna min ayatillahi wal hikmah inna Allaha kana
Right.
latifan khabira." Even
Right.
they're instructed to go and
Yes.
do the preaching. So it cannot be like you just lock yourself in a home or something like. Even if you are today's women.
No, in this particular scenario, it is said that men and women who might visit you, especially women who are visiting you, I mean, for you, the purpose is that if you're staying in your home or you're staying put in your home, it's not that you have to stay idle there. You still have a job to do.
Right.
You still have a job to do, and that job is that the Quran that is being revealed to the Prophet, which comes before them, they should instruct the common women who come to them to teach. And remember, these wives of the Prophet were not just teaching women, they were also teaching men. They would come to them as well to ask questions. We have so many narratives which tell us that the ordinary people would come and ask the wives of the Prophet as well.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Thank you.
Thank you. Danish Ibrahim, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mariam. Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Walaikum assalam.
My question is related to the passage that you just read from Surah Al-Ahzab. So, in that passage, as it is being clearly stated, that the special directives that were given to the women, to the believing women and the Prophet's wives, was due to the situation of fitna that was specifically being faced by them. So I just want to know why it cannot be extrapolated in our current times, where it could be a situation that women might be in a situation of fitna, where they can be harassed by people. Similarly, they can be harassed by men around.
So yes, of course, if there is a similar situation, some subversive action can be taken. But you see, it's not just this action that is being suggested. For example, if there is this issue of fitna and women feel that they might be molested or they might be assaulted, I mean, they can always have a guard with them. They can always have some protective custody measure they can take. So remember, it's not the form that has to be adopted today if the situation arises. It is the measure itself that must be taken for their own protection. So the real thing is protection. It can be achieved through various ways. But in the time of the Prophet, the only way to have achieved it was because the hypocrites they existed as a body. And they exist today also. But we cannot have any knowledge about them because hypocrisy is something which relates to the hearts. And in the times of the Prophet, the Almighty wanted all of these, or most of these hypocrites who had some semblance of converting, of becoming better, to be given that chance. So you see that we have a very special scenario in the times of the Prophet in which hypocrisy is being treated by no one else but the Almighty Himself, because He knows what is in the hearts, and He wants to give more time to those hypocrites. And in order to give them more time, He's imposing restrictions not on them but on the opposite side, so that they are given that protection. So you see, that has a very, very specific scenario. But the lesson that we can draw from that is that if there is a situation in which women in any way they feel any danger, then that danger has to be covered. Remember, we don't have any slave women today. So you see, that distinction of wearing that extra cloth was to make them distinct from slave women of those times. But this is no longer the case. So the real thing is that for their own protection, any measure which actually ensures this protection can be adopted.
Got it, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. I had a question of my own. So you mentioned that women have to cover themselves in front of other women too that are not their acquaintances.
Right.
But men don't have that same kind of directive. And you said that women are more likely or have a greater tendency to maybe find attraction within their sex. So is that like Allah saying that there's more bisexual and lesbian women compared to men?
No, it's not like that. I mean, it's like spelling out that this danger is always there. It's not that the likelihood is always there. There is this threat that could be there, and they should not expose themselves to women who are unrelated, because these women who are unrelated, they have this tendency of, as has been just spelled out, that they at times create this this whole scenario in the hearts of other people, in the minds of other men as well. So they would narrate these attributes of the women that they would meet and implant this whole scenario in the minds of not just women but in men as well, so that they would be attracted and they would have that lust against women. So basically what is being said here is that women who are unrelated should also be, you have to be careful about them as well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Saleem. Akram Bhatti, please go ahead.
In ayah 30, when Allah says, protect your hearts, I think it does not only mean that cover them. They are mostly covered when we go to meetings and we go to parties or stuff. Doesn't mean that Allah is saying that protect yourself from immoral behavior, or so it will lead, which will lead to zina, for lack of words. Protect your parts does not mean they're cover them. They are already covered. So do not.
So you see, the word used is not yugatina. It's not that you cover them. It's you protect them. Protection means that you properly cover them. It means that you just don't cover the parts themselves, but parts which are adjacent to them as well. So that is why, although basically the private parts are the ones that we know which are the private parts, but you see, when we cover them, we just don't cover those private parts. We cover parts which are adjacent to those parts as well. So had the word being cover, our response would have been different. But the word cover is not being used. The word used by the Quran is protect. Yahfazu, yahfazna, which means you have to expand that.
Doesn't it mean that do not act immorally? So do not protect yourself means protect your behavior. So do not behave in a way that will lead to the wrong things.
No, that would be an overstretching. That would be overstretching the verse. You see, the verse is specifically relating to the fact that you must dress up decently, and especially those parts of your dress or those parts of your limbs which have attraction for the opposite gender, they should be specially well covered and not be exposed. Because you see, the words have to be understood. It's yahfazna furujahunna. Furuj are your private parts. Yahfazna or yahfazu means to protect. So it's basically the private parts which are being highlighted here, that you should not expose them, because this is something which, as the Quran says, it's going to go against your inner purity, your inner purification. So the Quran is not saying that you are doing this because you are going to attract attention of the opposite gender. Remember, this is a wrong inference. The Quran is saying that you cover your private parts because it is pure for your own selves. Others, of course, they come as a secondary sort of an inclusion. But primarily, this is meant for your own cells, that if you are able to protect your own cells, you have to purify your own cells, then this is to be done by dressing in a modest way. So you see the whole stress changes, that this modesty, why should we have this modest behavior? Why this modest dress? Zalika azka lakum, because it's something which is purer for my own self. It is something which is going to purify myself from my inner side as well.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. So this question asks, so the purpose of niqab had nothing to do with people trying to harm the Prophet, and they wore them for protection so that no one would know who they were.
No, that is not the case. You see, as I said, when the Quran says yudnina alayhinna min jalabibihinna, from which the face covering is drawn, I mean, it has a very specific scenario that these women would go out for their own needs, as we know that they had to relieve themselves. The men had to do that as well, and these hypocrites would lie in ambush for them. And as you see, I mean, let me take out that verse once again, because we need to very carefully also observe the words of the Quran, because these words, they tell us how things were going on. So this is verse 58 from where this whole directive starts. It says, وَالَّذِينَ يُؤْذُونَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ بِغَيْرِ مَا اكْتَسَبُوا فَقَدِ احْتَمَلُوا بُهْتَانًا وَإِثْمًا مُبِينًا. And those who harass believing men and women for what they never did should know that they shall bear the guilt of a slander and grievous sin. And then it is said, O Prophet, in order to protect themselves from their pranks, enjoin your wives and your daughters and the wives of the true believers to draw over them a shawl when they go out. So you see, basically, the verse which starts off is, they are being harassed. They are being subjected to torment. And in order to make them distinct from from slave women, they are being told that because these slave women are present in the society and because these hypocrites are trying to make things difficult for you, this is what you need to do. And then the words say, Zalika adna an yurafna. When you do this, you will be recognized as decent women and you shall not be harmed. So you see, the whole scenario is, and not just here, when these verses end, the Quran says that لَإِلَّمْ يَنْتَهِ الْمُنَافِقُونَ. You see, for the first time, the word munafiqun is now injected in the Quran, these verses. It says that if these hypocrites, they do not desist, لَأُغْرِيَنَّكَ, and we will rouse you against them. We will provoke you against them, and they'll not find any place to go. وَقُتِّلُوا تَقْتِيلًا, and they shall be mercilessly killed. So you see, it's not a so common situation of gender interaction or covering your face in the wake of fitna as is generally understood. It's a very, very specific scenario.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks, so the fundamental essence is the protection of women and the means to achieve it. For example, the use of hijab are secondary. So today, if women are being attacked because they are veiling themselves and there is a narrative against Muslims, so is it fair to say that they can wear regular clothing, of course keeping in line with modesty, and they shouldn't be penalized for taking off their veils or hijab?
So first of all, I just explained that as far as the veil is concerned, that was never a part of the directive. You see, you need to understand that veiling or your face covering or the niqab was never a permanent part. I mean, it was just a temporary measure to make them distinct from slave women so that these subversive activities of the hypocrites could be checked. So it was never a permanent part of the dress of Muslim women. And as far as the hijab or the head, if you call the head covering the hijab, and that too the Quran says that it is mandatory only when you have made up your hair, when you have adorned your hair, when you have embellished your hair. If you have not embellished your hair and you just combed your hair, then even wearing your head covering or your head scarf is not mandatory. It's something recommended but not mandatory. It's only mandatory when you have made up your hair, you have embellished your hair. So clearly you can see that if you follow these directives, there is you don't need to do anything. You just need to comb your hair if you go out.
Yes, ma'am. Sir, right now you are talking about that ayat in Surah Nisa or Ahzab, Yuzuna. Right there, the stress is on Yuzuna. So would that be fair to say that these days?
Absolutely.
So these days, in Western countries, America and stuff, when women go out with hijab, with cover their head, so they are being teased, they are being harassed. So would it be fair to say that they can go out without having those?
I just answered this question. Sir, I just answered this question that, I mean, you have to understand that in the first place, there is no directive of any veil. And as far as your head covering is concerned, you are under obligation to cover your head. I mean, women are under obligation to cover their head only when they have embellished their hair, when they have decorated their hair in any way. If their hair is not decorated in any way, covering your head is not a mandatory part of any directive.